Hi class, we're continuing on with evolution looking at your natural selection. So if you already watched the video from that was posted from yesterday, you were looking at the idea of Darwin and the history of Darwin's kind of travels and observations when he went to the Galapagos. And so when he was in the Galapagos, Darwin saw that there was variation within a species population. It's different shape, different sizes, different colors. Sometimes they'll eat different food sources. And that variation is going to be inherited from their parents. And the other thing he noticed is that every generation produces more offsprings than can survive. And this is so that their population doesn't get wiped out if all their offsprings were to die off. If you think of fish, they produce so many offsprings, but very few of them actually survive. And it's a survival mechanism for the population to make sure that there's always offsprings to keep reproducing. The whole idea of a species is to keep reproducing so their population can keep surviving. And usually, as long as there's not any big catastrophic events or a happening, a population will remain stable. Based on his observations, he was able to write his Origins of the Species book, which is still around today that you could read. He was able to come up with, when you produce more offsprings than survive, you will now compete for the resources that are available. This will then lead to the species that are better fitted for the environment to survive and produce more. You can see your variation, which is going to be inherited, and the more favorable traits are more likely to survive and pass them down to the offspring. Survival is not random. So this is your survival of the fittest, who is better adapted for that environment. Okay, and so then the favorable variations will become more and more common. So if you think of your peppered moth example, you have the white color moths were better suited, and then once the tree color changed, then the black colored moths were then suited. So the survival wasn't random, it was based on whichever one was better suited for the environment. So what does actual natural selection mean? It's the process of change within a population over generations of time. And so the idea that you have a specific trait and you will pass it to your offspring so that they can then survive and have more offsprings. Random mutations will happen. Remember, we talked about them in the genetics unit. Sometimes it pops up as a new one. And so if there is from that random mutation, a beneficial trait, then that specific species will be better adapted for the environment and they'll pass that trait on to their offsprings, and then you'll start to see evolution happening. When we talk about being better adapted for an environment, we are talking about survival of the fittest. So when you have an environment, the whole idea is that that species wants to produce offsprings for the next generation. And so when you say something's more fit for the environment, it's because it has a better chance of producing offsprings and keeping their population going on. So your organisms who can reproduce offsprings are said to be fit. So if we're looking at this picture here, you can see that you have the two colored mice on the darker surface. So which one that bird comes in, it's going to pick off the white mice because they're easier to see. And so then the kind of darker gray mice are going to be said to be more fit for that environment. If it had been a snow-covered area, the white ones would be more fit for the environment. So survival of the fitness totally depends on the environment, and environments can change. So it's not like if you are more fit for one location, you could switch for that environment. Think of your peppered moths. The white ones were more fit, and then the Industrial Revolution happened, and it switched. When we're talking about natural selection, if you see species becoming more fit based on which trait they have, it is known as disruptive, stabilizing, and directional. So when you're looking at disruptive, it's favoring opposite extremes. So both extremes of the trait. So you say you have the light color, the dark color, and the medium color. Disruptive is going to favor the light and the dark, not the middle. Stabilizing wants the average, so your middle phenotype. And then directional is only one extreme. So make sure you realize that disruptive is both extremes. One extreme for directional and then the average for stabilizing. And so the red line in the pictures is showing what the population was, and then all of a sudden a selective pressure comes in and it has to switch. And the blue line is showing now what type of natural selection is happening. So your blue one for number 1 is your disruptive. Then you have your stabilizing, your average, or the directional is one way. There one other type of selection that happens, and that's what's known as sexual selection. That's going to look at how well an individual can reproduce based on a trait. So if you have your peacocks, who's got the prettier feather? I've talked about the BBC video, the one that had the best mating dance or the cleanest area for the bird. I'll attach the videos for kind of the BBC one in the content tab, and you can kind of take a look. And so that's a form of sexual selection. Do they have that best trait, the more favorable trait? Sometimes with herd animals, it will be female versus or male versus male competition. Sometimes the female picks the mate. It just depends on what animals you're looking at, and they all have their own form of way of trying to be the best choice for that mate so that they are able to keep reproducing.